Marcus Reed had developed a comprehensive understanding of exactly how many ceiling tiles the Valorian Grand Council chamber contained. 47 across, 63 deep, each one etched with clan symbols in rotating patterns that probably meant something profound to people who hadn't spent the last 7 hours watching trade negotiation holographics. His official title was Diplomatic Economic Analyst, which sounded impressive and meant he got to sit in uncomfortable chairs, while people argued about tariff structures in languages that made his translator work overtime. The Valorians approached everything with the same intense formality they apparently brought to warfare. Every proposal required 3 rounds of ceremonial acknowledgement. Every counterproposal demanded ritualized responses, and Marcus was starting to understand why the previous analyst had requested reassignment to a mining station in an asteroid belt where the only negotiations involved rocks. The Terran coalition's proposed reduction in crystalline export duties fails to account for the sacred obligation of the Crimson Blade clan to maintain resource purity standards established in the Third Concord. The speaker was a Valorian elder whose skin shifted through shades of deep purple as he spoke, each color change apparently carrying additional meaning that Marcus's briefing materials hadn't adequately covered. Ambassador Patterson, leading the human delegation, maintained the diplomatic smile she'd perfected over 30 years of service. "We respect the Crimson Blade clan's traditional oversight. Perhaps we could discuss transitional implementation frameworks that honor both parties' concerns." Marcus made notes on his datapad, knowing he'd spend tonight turning this 7-hour session into a concise report that would be filed somewhere and forgotten. His attention kept drifting to the Valorian delegation across the negotiating table, specifically to the woman who'd been watching him with unsettling focus for the past 3 days. Commander Sheev of the Crimson Blade clan sat among the military advisors, her posture radiating the kind of controlled readiness that Marcus associated with people who could kill him in 17 different ways before he finished screaming. She was tall even by Valorian standards, easily 6.5 feet, with the gracefully pointed ears that all her species shared and skin that shifted between deep crimson and copper, depending on her apparent mood or the conversational context. Marcus still wasn't entirely clear on the mechanism. What made her presence particularly unnerving was that she didn't participate in the negotiations. She just observed, her dark eyes tracking the human delegation with tactical precision, and for reasons Marcus couldn't explain, she seemed especially focused on him. Every time he glanced up from his notes, he found her gaze locked on his position, assessing him like a problem that required careful solution. "Commander Reed," Patterson's voice cut through his wandering attention. "Your analysis on the proposed duty structure." Marcus pulled his focus back to the holographic displays, grateful for years of practice at sounding competent while his brain caught up. The Crimson Blade proposal maintains their revenue streams while creating bottlenecks in our supply chain efficiency. However, if we implement the transitional framework the ambassador suggested and tie it to the quality certification protocols outlined in Appendix 7, we achieve mutual benefit without compromising either party's core interests. Several Valorian delegates' skin shifted to lighter shades, approval, according to his briefings. The purple-skinned elder nodded slowly, his ears tilting forward in what seemed like acknowledgement of a point well made. "The human demonstrates understanding of balance," the elder said. "We will consider this approach during our internal deliberations," which meant they'd argue about it for another 6 hours tomorrow. But at least Marcus had contributed something beyond ceiling tile inventory. The session concluded with more ceremonial acknowledgments, and the delegates began dispersing toward the exits. Marcus started gathering his materials, already mentally composing the report summary, when he noticed Sheev approaching directly instead of following her delegation. She moved with the fluid precision of someone whose every gesture was trained for combat efficiency, other Valorians stepping aside to give her passage without appearing to consciously do so. Her skin had shifted to a deep crimson that Marcus's translator unhelpfully identified as purposeful intensity, which could mean anything from "I respect your analysis" to "I'm about to challenge you to ritual combat." She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that Marcus had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact, and spoke 3 words in perfect Terran standard without accent or hesitation. "Come with me." Marcus's diplomatic training warred with his survival instincts, both agreeing that this situation required careful navigation. "Commander Sheev, I appreciate the invitation, but I should coordinate with Ambassador Patterson before." Now, not shouted, not aggressive, just stated with the absolute conviction of someone who expected compliance. Her skin shifted through several colors Marcus couldn't interpret, settling on something between crimson and gold. Patterson caught his eye from across the room, her expression suggesting she was as confused as Marcus, but also acutely aware that refusing a direct request from a high-ranking Valorian military commander could complicate negotiations. She gave him a subtle nod that Marcus interpreted as go, but try not to cause an interstellar incident. "Of course," Marcus said, attempting to project calm professionalism while his pulse rate suggested he was about to sprint for an exit. "Lead the way." Sheev turned without waiting for further response, clearly expecting him to follow. Marcus fell into step behind her, aware of the sudden attention their departure was receiving from both delegations. Valorians watched with expressions that ranged from shock to what might have been disapproval, their skin colors shifting in patterns that created a visual conversation Marcus couldn't begin to understand. They exited the council chamber into corridors that were somehow both crystalline and organic, walls that seemed to grow rather than being constructed, with bioluminescent veins providing soft illumination. Sheev maintained her purposeful stride, taking turns without hesitation through sections of the palace that Marcus's limited tour hadn't covered. "Commander," he tried, keeping his voice carefully neutral, "can you tell me where we're going?" "My chambers." Direct, no elaboration, delivered in the same tone she might use to report tactical positions. Marcus's brain immediately generated about 47 concerning scenarios, none of which aligned with diplomatic protocol. "I'm not sure that's appropriate given. You will understand when we arrive." She didn't look back, just continued navigating the palace's impossible architecture with the confidence of someone who'd walked these corridors for years. They passed guards stationed at intervals, their armor marked with the symbols Marcus recognized as Crimson Blade clan designation. Every one of them stopped to stare, as Sheev led a human deeper into what were clearly restricted sections. Their skin colors shifted to what Marcus was increasingly certain was confused concern, but none of them challenged Sheev's passage. The corridors grew more ornate, with personal touches that suggested private quarters rather than public spaces. Weapons displayed with ceremonial care, clan banners in crimson and gold, doorways marked with symbols that Marcus's translator identified as family or rank designations. They stopped before one such door, more elaborate than the others, with markings that seemed to flow like liquid metal. Sheev placed her hand against a recognition panel, and the door opened with a soft harmonic tone. She gestured Marcus inside, and the moment he crossed the threshold, driven by equal parts curiosity and the awareness that backing out now would definitely cause diplomatic complications, she followed and activated a locking mechanism that sealed with an ominous finality. The room was larger than Marcus expected, laid out in ways that suggested Valorian sensibilities about personal space. Weapons lined one wall, not ceremonial displays but actual combat implements, maintained with obvious care. What appeared to be family artifacts occupied shelves carved directly into the walls, objects Marcus couldn't identify but which clearly held significance. The furnishings were minimal but functional, designed for someone who valued utility over decoration. Sheev turned to face him, and her skin shifted through a cascade of colors, crimson to copper to something that approached gold, cycling through patterns that his translator struggled to render into emotional equivalents. When she spoke, her voice carried absolute conviction that made Marcus's survival instincts scream warnings. "You are mine tonight." Marcus's heart rate achieved speeds normally reserved for combat situations. His mind raced through every possible interpretation of those 4 words, most of them concerning, several actively terrifying, and none of them aligned with his job description as diplomatic economic analyst. "Commander Sheev, I think there's been a significant cultural misunderstanding." She raised one hand, a gesture that somehow commanded silence more effectively than shouting. "I invoke the sanctuary claim," she said, switching to formal Valorian that his translator rendered with careful precision. "You will remain in my chambers until dawn, bearing witness to words that can only be spoken in absolute trust." The translator provided helpful context tags. Sanctuary claim, ancient ritual, high cultural significance, binding under warrior law, which was informative but not particularly reassuring. Sheev must have seen something in his expression, probably the poorly concealed panic, because her skin shifted to softer blue that his briefings had suggested indicated regret or apology. "I am not claiming you for pleasure, human. I am claiming you for survival." She moved to what appeared to be a sitting area, gesturing for him to take one of the low seats designed for Valorian physiology. "Sit. I will explain. And then you will understand why I have chosen you, why it must be you, and why what happens in this room tonight may determine whether I live to see the next council session." Marcus sat, because his legs had apparently decided they were done supporting his weight, and waited for an explanation that would hopefully make sense of the most bizarre diplomatic situation he'd encountered in 7 years of interstellar service. Marcus perched awkwardly on furniture designed for beings with different joint articulation, trying to maintain some semblance of professional composure while his brain processed the situation. Locked in the private chambers of a Valorian military commander who just claimed him for reasons involving survival. This was definitely not covered in the diplomatic training manual. Sheev settled onto a seat across from him with the controlled grace of someone whose every movement was calculated. Her skin had stabilized to a deep crimson streaked with copper, which Marcus's increasingly unreliable translator suggested indicated serious intent mixed with controlled emotion. Her ears tilted forward in what he'd learned was focused attention. "You understand the sanctuary claim?" she asked, though it was clearly less question than assessment of his knowledge level. Only what the translator just provided. Ancient ritual, high cultural significance, binding under warrior law. Marcus kept his voice steady despite his pulse rate suggesting otherwise. The practical implications would be helpful. "Among my people, warriors facing impossible situations may invoke the sanctuary claim. They select one person, only one, to serve as sacred witness to truths that cannot be spoken publicly." Her hands moved in gestures that seemed to be part of the explanation, though Marcus couldn't interpret their meaning. "The person claimed is bound by honor to remain through the night, to listen without judgment, and to carry the burden of knowledge that might determine political outcomes or military strategy." So this is about protecting information, not? Marcus trailed off, acutely aware that finishing that sentence could create new problems. Sheev's skin shifted to a shade that might have been amusement. Not physical intimacy, no. Though I understand why a human might assume that interpretation. She leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes holding his with unsettling intensity. "The sanctuary claim is about trust," Marcus read. "About selecting someone who will hear truths that could destroy you, and trusting they will carry that knowledge with honor." Why me? The question escaped before his diplomatic training could polish it into more formal phrasing. "You have an entire clan, military subordinates, people who understand your culture and political structures. Why claim an outsider who's been on your planet for 3 days? Because those are precisely the reasons I cannot claim them. Shiv's skin darkened to shades that approached black, a color shift Marcus's translator unhelpfully identified as profound concern or existential threat. Anyone within the clan structure is either compromised or would be forced to report my suspicions to superiors. Any Valorian I confide in becomes entangled in webs of loyalty and obligation that make objective witness impossible. She stood, moving to the weapon's wall, her hand hovering over what appeared to be a ceremonial blade without actually touching it. But you, Marcus Reed, diplomatic economic analyst from Earth, have no clan loyalty. You are protected by interstellar treaties and diplomatic immunity. You observe our politics from outside perspective, and she turned to face him fully. You have shown in 3 days of negotiations that you understand balance, that you listen before speaking, that you seek solutions that serve mutual benefit rather than one-sided advantage. Marcus absorbed that, trying to reconcile the trade negotiation analyst, he thought he was with the sacred witness this warrior apparently needed. What truth do you need me to hear? Shiv's skin shifted through rapid color changes, crimson to copper to something approaching violet, cycling through patterns that seemed to reflect internal conflict. That I am going to die unless I can prove conspiracy, and that proving conspiracy will require help from someone my enemies cannot easily threaten or compromise. The words hung in the air between them, stark and unadorned by diplomatic language. Marcus's analytical mind immediately began cataloging implications, while his human instincts recognized the weight of someone sharing the kind of truth that usually stayed hidden. "Explain," he said, because detailed understanding seemed safer than immediate reactions. Shiv returned to her seat, and what followed was the most comprehensive political briefing Marcus had received since arriving on Veloria. She described the Crimson Blade clan's internal power structures, the matriarch who held ultimate authority, the council of elders who advised and sometimes constrained her decisions, the younger warriors who represented the clan's military future. Shiv occupied an unusual position, popular with the younger warriors due to her military victories, respected by some elders for her tactical brilliance, but viewed as threat by others who saw her growing influence as challenge to established hierarchy. 3 months ago, I returned from successful campaign against the Razor Wind rebels who had been disrupting trade routes in the outer territories. Her hands moved in gestures that Marcus was learning indicated military achievement. The victory secured resources, demonstrated effective strategy, and earned praise from warriors who serve under my command. It also made me too prominent in eyes of those who prefer the old power arrangements. Political jealousy isn't exactly unique to Valorians, Marcus observed. Successful commanders always create resentment among those they outshine. True, but among my people, such resentment takes specific forms. Shiv's skin darkened again. The matriarch's closest advisor, Elder Corvin, has spent 30 years consolidating power through careful manipulation of clan politics. He selects which information reaches the matriarch, influences which warriors receive prestigious assignments, and maintains network of loyalists who owe their positions to his patronage. And your victories threaten that network. Precisely. Shiv's ears tilted back in what seemed like frustration. Corvin cannot attack me openly. My military record is too strong, my support among younger warriors too broad. So instead, he undermines me through careful manipulation. Evidence of supposed protocol violations appearing in my records. Questions raised about my loyalty to traditional clan values. Whispers that I seek personal power rather than serving the clan's interests. Marcus felt the familiar pattern recognition of someone who'd analyzed enough political structures to see the playbook. Classic destabilization campaign. Erode credibility gradually. make allies question their support, isolate the target before moving for elimination. Your understanding is accurate. Sheev pulled up a holographic display from a device on her wrist, projecting files into the air between them. Marcus saw Valorian text his translator struggled to render: financial records, communication logs, military reports. But Corvin has escalated beyond reputation damage. He is fabricating evidence that would justify formal accusations under warrior law. She manipulated the display, highlighting specific documents. Communications suggesting I have been in contact with Razor Wind faction leaders, the same rebels I defeated. Financial transfers that appear to show I received payment for classified military information. Even altered combat footage from the campaign that, when viewed out of context, suggests I allowed certain rebel leaders to escape rather than capturing them. Marcus leaned forward, his analyst training engaging with the problem despite the bizarre circumstances. That's sophisticated, building a narrative that explains your military success through treasonous collaboration rather than tactical skill. Exactly. Sheev's skin shifted to colors that suggested grim satisfaction at being understood. If Corvin brings these fabrications before the clan council, I will be required to defend myself under ancient protocols that assume accusers act in good faith. The burden of proof falls on me to demonstrate innocence, and the evidence he has constructed is extensive enough to create reasonable doubt. And the penalty for treason in Valorian warrior culture: death, public execution to demonstrate clan's commitment to honor and loyalty. She said it without drama, just stating fact. Corvin has been building this case for months. I estimate he will move within the next 2 weeks, possibly timing the accusation to coincide with upcoming military ceremonies when maximum political impact can be achieved. Marcus sat back, processing the scope of what Sheev was revealing. So you've claimed me as sanctuary witness to what? Provide testimony that you told me about the conspiracy. That won't stop him from bringing charges. No, but it creates obligation. Sheev dismissed the holographic display, her full attention returning to Marcus. Under the sanctuary claim, you become my sworn witness. What I tell you in this chamber is protected by the same laws that protect sacred rituals. Any Valorian who harms you or attempts to coerce you into breaking the trust violates ancient codes that even Corvin cannot easily dismiss. You're weaponizing a trust ritual to create a protected witness. I am using our oldest traditions to protect truth that would otherwise die with me. Her skin shifted to shades that approached blue: regret, vulnerability, emotions that seemed at odds with the warrior commander. I do not make this claim lightly, Marcus Reed. To invoke sanctuary is to admit I cannot solve this through traditional means, that I need help from outside my own structures. It is admission of weakness that my enemies will exploit. Before Marcus could respond, the chamber door chimed. Not a polite request for entry, but an insistent demand that suggested someone was overriding normal protocols. Sheev's entire posture shifted, becoming predatory ready in the space of a heartbeat, her skin flashing through colors Marcus couldn't interpret but which screamed warning. Do not speak, she said quickly. Do not move, just observe. The door opened despite being locked, revealing a Valorian male whose skin bore the deep purple markings Marcus had learned to associate with high-ranking elders. His ears were decorated with golden ornaments denoting status, and his expression, to the extent Marcus could read Valorian expressions, suggested barely contained rage. He spoke rapidly in Valorian that Marcus's translator rendered with unusual precision, as if the device recognized the formal nature of the language. Commander Sheev, you violate protocol by bringing an outsider to your private chambers. The clan laws regarding sacred spaces are absolute, and your disregard for. I have invoked the sanctuary claim. Sheev's voice cut through his objection like a blade, her skin shifting to crimson so deep it appeared almost black. This human is my chosen witness, claimed under ancient law that predates your service to the clan by several lifetimes. Interrupt us again, and you violate sacred ritual, which carries penalties you understand better than most, Elder Thren. The elder's skin flashed through a cascade of colors, purple to crimson to something approaching white, cycling through what Marcus's overwhelmed translator identified as rage, fear, shock, and political calculation occurring in rapid sequence. His ears flattened against his head in an expression Marcus suddenly understood was barely contained fury. "The matriarch will hear of this violation," Thren said, though his voice had lost its earlier authority. "You cannot hide behind ancient ritual to excuse improper conduct with aliens. I invoke no excuse. I claim my right as warrior under threat, as is allowed by the same traditions you use to justify your own position." Sheev moved between Thren and Marcus, a protective positioning that was impossible to misinterpret. "Leave my chambers. The sanctuary claim is invoked, and dawn has not yet come. Everything else is politics that can wait for daylight." Thren stared at them both for a long moment, his skin settling into deep purple that suggested he was calculating responses, and finding none that didn't risk violating traditions even he couldn't dismiss. Finally, he performed a gesture that Marcus's translator identified as formal withdrawal under protest, and departed, the door sealing behind him with obvious force. Silence filled the chamber. Sheev remained standing between Marcus and the door, her posture gradually relaxing from combat readiness to merely alert. When she turned back to face him, her skin had shifted to colors that suggested grim satisfaction mixed with concern. That was Elder Thren, one of Corvin's primary allies. "His intrusion confirms they are watching me, aware that I might attempt to expose their conspiracy." She moved back to her seat, though Marcus noticed she positioned herself to maintain clear sight lines to the door. His attempt to interrupt the sanctuary claim was test, to see if I would abandon the ritual under pressure, or if I would commit fully to this path. "And you committed." "I had no choice. Thren will report to Corvin that I have claimed a human witness, which will accelerate their timeline." She met Marcus's eyes with unsettling directness. "You understand now why it had to be you. Why I needed someone they cannot easily threaten or eliminate. You have just become the most protected person in Crimson Blade territory, because harming you would violate sacred law in ways that would turn even Corvin's allies against him." Marcus processed that, his analyst mind cataloging the political mechanics, while his human instincts recognized he'd just been positioned as a shield against assassination through the clever weaponization of cultural tradition. "You've made me a piece in your political survival," he said, not quite accusation but not quite acceptance either. "I have made you my witness, which is both more and less than a piece." Sheev's skin shifted to softer crimson. "You can refuse. The sanctuary claim requires consent, and if you wish to leave, I will unseal the door and accept the consequences of a failed claim. But if you stay," her ears tilted forward in emphasis, "if you stay through this night and hear the full truth I need to speak, you become part of something that might determine not just my survival, but the future of how our peoples interact." Marcus looked at the sealed door, thought about the comfortable guest quarters waiting in the diplomatic wing, considered the 17 protocols he was probably violating just by sitting here, thought about Elder Thren's rage and the political conspiracy Sheev had described, thought about spending his career writing reports about tariff structures that no one read versus actually mattering in ways that diplomacy textbooks claimed was possible but rarely delivered. "I'll stay," he said, "because sometimes the most important decisions were the ones that didn't make sense on paper. Tell me what I need to witness." Sheev's skin shifted through colors that Marcus was learning to read as relief, mixed with something that approached gratitude. "Then let us begin properly. The night is long, and the truths I must speak are not simple. But by dawn, you will understand why I chose you, Marcus Reed, and why your presence in my chambers tonight might save more than just my life." She began to speak, and Marcus settled in to become the witness that ancient Valorian law required and that modern politics had made necessary. The bioluminescent patterns in Sheev's walls had shifted to what Marcus assumed was night cycle illumination, casting the chamber in soft amber light that made the weapon displays look like ceremonial art. He'd been listening to Sheev's revelations for what his internal clock suggested was approaching 2 hours, though Valoria's longer rotational period made time tracking unreliable without checking his datapad. The scope of the conspiracy against her was more comprehensive than Marcus had initially understood. Sheev had pulled up file after file on her holographic display, walking him through the evidence with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent months analyzing her own impending destruction. "The communication logs are particularly sophisticated," she said, highlighting a series of encrypted transmissions. "They appear to show exchanges between my command codes and known Razor Wind operatives during the campaign. The encryption is authentic. The routing paths match my typical operational security, and the content discusses tactical information that only someone with my access level could provide." Marcus studied the displayed data, his analyst training identifying patterns, but they're fabrications. Completely. But proving that requires access to secure military systems that I cannot reach without authorization from the very council that Corvin controls. Her skin shifted through frustrated shades. "He has constructed a perfect trap. Evidence that looks authentic requires resources to disprove that I cannot access without first overcoming the accusations the evidence supports." Classic Catch-22. Marcus leaned forward, examining the transmission timestamps. "Wait, these are dated during active combat operations. You were engaged in real-time tactical decisions during these supposed communications with rebel leaders." "Yes. Several of the fabricated transmissions allegedly occurred while I was literally fighting Razor Wind forces in direct combat." Sheev pulled up additional files showing combat logs, engagement records, command decisions time-stamped to the minute. Any detailed analysis would show the impossibility of conducting covert communications while simultaneously coordinating battle maneuvers. But such detailed analysis would require independent investigation, which Corvin will ensure never happens. Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of finding a crack in seemingly perfect construction. "That's your defense. The timeline contradictions. If you can demonstrate that the alleged communications occurred during verified combat engagements." "I can demonstrate nothing without first surviving the formal accusations." Sheev's ears flattened in what Marcus now recognized as frustrated acknowledgement of impossible situations. Valorian warrior law requires that formal accusations be heard by full clan council. During the proceedings, the accused is stripped of rank and confined to ceremonial detention. All access to military resources, communication systems, and loyal subordinates is severed pending the council's judgment, preventing exactly the kind of timeline analysis that would expose the fabrications. Precisely. She dismissed the holographic display with a gesture that suggested controlled anger. "Corvin has spent his career understanding how to manipulate our legal traditions. He knows that once formal accusations are made, the process itself becomes trap that prevents effective defense." Marcus processed the implications, his mind automatically constructing scenarios and strategic responses, the way he would approach a complex trade negotiation. "So you need evidence that can be presented independently, from sources Corvin doesn't control, before the formal accusations are made. That is where you become relevant," Marcus read. Sheev's skin shifted to shades that approached gold, a color Marcus's translator suggested indicated hope or strategic possibility. "You are not subject to clan law. Your access to information systems is governed by diplomatic treaty, not Corvin's authority. and your analysis would carry weight of neutral third party rather than accused defender. The pieces clicked into place with uncomfortable clarity. You want me to investigate the conspiracy using my diplomatic credentials and analyst training, gathering evidence that exists outside your controlled military systems. I need you to verify what I have discovered and to present findings through channels that Corvin cannot easily suppress or dismiss. She pulled up a new display, this one showing Valorian political structures, financial networks, communication routing systems. The fabricated evidence exists in our systems because Corvin has access to alter records. But the truth exists in peripheral data, transaction timestamps from independent financial institutions, communication routing logs from civilian networks, records from non-military sources that corroborate my actual locations and activities during the times Corvin claims I was committing treason. Marcus studied the display, his analyst mind already mapping investigation strategies. You've essentially claimed me as witness so I can become your investigator. The sanctuary claim requires only that you listen and carry knowledge with honor. What you choose to do with that knowledge is your decision. Sheev's tone was carefully neutral, not quite requesting, not quite manipulating, but definitely presenting options. I cannot demand you act. The ritual forbids such requirements, but I can hope that the truth you have witnessed will motivate you to pursue verification through your own initiative and judgment. It was clever manipulation wrapped in cultural tradition. Using the sanctuary claim to share information she couldn't safely reveal through normal channels, then trusting that Marcus's analyst instincts and basic sense of justice would drive him to investigate without her having to explicitly request it. He should probably be annoyed at being maneuvered. Instead, he found himself impressed by the tactical sophistication. If I do investigate, he said carefully, and if I find evidence supporting your claims, how do we present it without making you appear to be hiding behind alien protection? That is the next complication. Sheev's skin shifted through contemplative shades. Evidence from you must be introduced carefully, positioned as routine diplomatic analysis rather than deliberate investigation. Perhaps findings from your economic assessments that happen to intersect with relevant timelines, or observations from cultural study that reveal inconsistencies in official records. Marcus smiled, despite the seriousness of the situation. You want me to accidentally discover evidence while performing my completely unrelated diplomatic duties. I want you to be the thorough analyst that 3 days of negotiations have demonstrated you are, and to apply that thoroughness to understanding Valorian political and economic systems as part of your assigned mission to facilitate trade relations. Her mandibles moved in what Marcus was learning meant Valorian amusement. If such understanding happens to reveal inconsistencies relevant to internal clan matters, well, that is simply conscientious performance of your analytical responsibilities. The chamber door chimed again, this time with a different tone pattern that made Sheev's posture shift from relaxed conversation to alert attention. She checked a display on her wrist device, and her skin flashed through colors Marcus couldn't interpret before settling on deep crimson. Elder Corvin himself, she said quietly, coming personally rather than sending subordinates. The sanctuary claim has provoked response faster than I anticipated. Should I, Marcus started, remain exactly where you are? Say nothing unless directly addressed. Observe. Sheev moved to stand near the door, not defensive but clearly positioning herself between Marcus and whoever was about to enter. And remember, you are sacred witness under protection of ancient law. Even Corvin cannot threaten you directly without violating traditions that would destroy his political standing. The door opened to reveal a Valorian male whose bearing radiated authority in ways that made even Sheev's commanding presence seem muted by comparison. His skin bore deep purple markings mixed with crimson in patterns Marcus's translator identified as indicating highest elder rank. his ears decorated with ornaments that suggested generations of noble lineage. But it was his eyes that held Marcus's attention, dark and calculating, assessing the chamber's occupants with the precision of someone who'd spent decades evaluating threats and opportunities. Corvin spoke in Valorian that flowed like formal poetry, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested the language was being used at its most sophisticated level. Marcus's translator worked overtime to render it. Commander Sheev, the matriarch is distressed to learn you have invoked sanctuary claim with an alien representative during active diplomatic negotiations. Such actions raise questions about your judgment and your understanding of appropriate conduct for one bearing the Crimson Blade's honor. The sanctuary claim is my right under warrior law, Elder Corvin. Neither the matriarch nor the council may question its invocation without violating traditions older than our spacefaring civilization. Sheev's response was delivered with equal formality, her skin shifting to deep crimson that suggested she was matching his political positioning. My judgment in selecting a witness is protected by the same laws that protect your position as advisor. Corvin's gaze shifted to Marcus, assessing him with the kind of focus that made Marcus acutely aware he was sitting in the middle of a political battlefield, where the weapons were words and cultural traditions he barely understood. And what truths require sharing with an economic analyst from Earth, Commander? What sacred knowledge must be witnessed by one who arrived on our world mere days ago? The sanctuary claim does not require that I justify my choice to you or anyone else, Sheev responded before Marcus could consider whether he should speak. The witness I have chosen is bound by honor to carry what is shared. The content of that sharing is between witness and witnessed, protected by laws you claim to revere. I revere our laws, which is precisely why I question their invocation in service of what appears to be political theater rather than genuine need. Corvin's skin shifted through colors Marcus recognized as controlled anger. You face no immediate threat, command no desperate military operation, navigate no crisis that would traditionally warrant sanctuary claim. You are a decorated warrior using sacred ritual to create protection for actions that merit investigation. Marcus felt the accusation lurking beneath the formal language. Corvin was all but stating that Sheev had invoked the sanctuary claim because she had something to hide, that she needed protection from legitimate scrutiny. It was masterful political maneuvering, turning the protective ritual into evidence of guilt. Sheev's response was delivered with the same controlled precision. I am a warrior who recognizes threats others might overlook, who understands that political danger can be as lethal as battlefield combat, who uses every tool our traditions provide to ensure truth is preserved and heard. She took a step toward Corvin, her posture shifting to something that made Marcus's combat instincts recognize someone preparing for potential conflict. If you question my invocation of sacred law, bring your concerns to the full council. Present your accusations formally. But until you do so, respect the traditions you claim to protect and leave my chambers while the sanctuary claim remains in effect. The challenge was explicit. Corvin could either accept the sanctuary claim's legitimacy or openly violate traditions he'd spent years using to maintain his own power. His skin cycled through colors that suggested rapid internal calculation before settling on deep purple that seemed carefully neutral. The matriarch will hear of this matter. Expect summons for formal discussion once your claimed witness is released at dawn. He performed a gesture that Marcus's translator identified as departure with reservation of future action, and turned to leave, but paused at the door to deliver one final observation. Choose your allies carefully, Commander. Even sacred witnesses cannot protect you from consequences of poor judgment. The door sealed behind him, and tension Marcus hadn't fully registered drained from the chamber. Sheev remained standing for a long moment, her skin shifting through colors that suggested she was processing the encounter and its implications. When she finally moved back to her seat, her posture carried exhaustion that the formal confrontation had temporarily masked. "That was more direct than I expected," she said quietly. "Corvin typically operates through proxies and careful maneuvering. Personal confrontation suggests I have disrupted his timeline, or that he views the sanctuary claim as more significant threat than I anticipated." Marcus found his voice, though his heart rate was still recovering from the experience of being assessed by someone who radiated political danger. "He all but accused you of using the ritual to hide guilt." "Yes, a sophisticated approach. He cannot violate the sanctuary claim directly, so instead he undermines its legitimacy by suggesting I invoke it without proper cause." Sheev's ears tilted back in frustration. "In the morning, there will be council discussion, questions about my judgment, pressure to reveal what was shared during the claim. He will use the ritual itself as evidence of suspicious behavior." "Can he do that? I thought the sanctuary claim was protected." "The claim protects the witness and the content of what is shared. It does not prevent political speculation about why the claim was invoked." She pulled up her holographic display again, this time showing what appeared to be a timeline. "Corvin will use my invocation as justification to accelerate his accusations. He will argue that a warrior hiding behind ancient ritual clearly has something to hide, that formal investigation is warranted to protect clan interests." Marcus studied the timeline, seeing the trap closing. "So by claiming me as witness to protect yourself, you've actually given him ammunition to move faster. A calculated risk. Without the claim, I had no protected way to share what I knew, no ability to create outside witness to the conspiracy. With the claim, I have you, but I also provoke response that accelerates the timeline." Her skin shifted to shades that approached blue, that color Marcus had learned indicated regret or vulnerability. "I am gambling that having protected witness outweighs the political cost of appearing to hide." "And you're gambling on me," Marcus said, understanding finally settling into place. "Gambling that I'll investigate, that I'll find verifiable evidence, that I'll present it through channels they can't easily dismiss, and that I'll do all of this fast enough to matter. Yes, simple, direct, honest. I am gambling on the human who spent 3 days demonstrating careful analysis, balanced judgment, and willingness to find solutions that serve multiple interests. I am gambling that the person who sits through 7-hour negotiations without losing focus might apply that same diligence to investigating whether a warrior is being framed for treason." Marcus looked at her. This alien commander who'd claimed him through ancient ritual, who disrupted his assignment and possibly his career, who'd positioned him as shield and investigator simultaneously, who was trusting him with her life through the most elaborate political maneuver he'd encountered in 7 years of diplomatic service. He should probably refuse, should insist on returning to his quarters, filing reports, letting Valorian politics sort themselves out without human interference, should be the diplomatic analyst who observed without participating. But diplomatic analysts didn't get locked in private chambers and claimed as sacred witnesses by warriors facing assassination through political conspiracy. And Marcus had spent enough years writing reports that no one read to recognize when he had the opportunity to actually matter. "I'll need access to Valorian financial networks," he said, his tone shifting from uncertain to analytical. "Civilian communication routing logs for the relevant time periods. Independent verification sources that can corroborate your locations during the dates Corvin's fabricated evidence claims you were communicating with rebels." Sheev's skin shifted through colors that Marcus's translator rendered as hope, relief, and something warmer he couldn't quite identify. "I can provide initial access codes to civilian systems. Your diplomatic credentials will allow deeper investigation under pretense of economic analysis. And I'll need you to brief me on Valorian political structures in detail. Not just military hierarchy, but how the Elder Council works, what leverage points exist, who Corvin's allies are, and what motivates them. Marcus was already mentally mapping investigation strategies, applying the same systematic approach he used for trade negotiations to political conspiracy. If I'm going to find evidence that sticks, I need to understand the system well enough to know what will convince the people who matter. That will take time we may not have. Then we start now and work through the night. Marcus checked his datapad, noting the Valorian time cycle. You said the sanctuary claim lasts until dawn. How long is that? 7 more hours by your measurement. Shiv was already pulling up additional files, her posture shifting from exhausted warrior to tactical planner. Long enough to provide comprehensive briefing if you are willing to absorb information rapidly. I've sat through 7-hour negotiations about tariff structures. I think I can handle political briefings. Marcus settled into a more comfortable position on the alien furniture, pulling out his own datapad to take notes. Start with the Elder Council's decision-making process and work backward through how Corvin has consolidated influence. What followed was the most intensive crash course in alien political systems Marcus had ever experienced. Shiv walked him through decades of Crimson Blade clan history, explaining how Corvin had carefully positioned himself as indispensable advisor, how he'd cultivated networks of obligation and favor, how he'd systematically eliminated or marginalized those who might challenge his influence. She showed Marcus the financial flows that sustained Corvin's power, resource allocation decisions that rewarded loyal subordinates, economic opportunities steered toward those who supported his positions, subtle patterns of preferential treatment that built dependency on his continued goodwill. He operates like a spider at the center of a web, Marcus observed, mapping the relationship networks on his datapad. Every thread connects back to him, and pulling any single thread risks disturbing the entire structure. Accurate analogy, which is why direct confrontation fails. He has built redundant support systems that can compensate for any single point of pressure. Shiv highlighted specific individuals in the network. But webs have vulnerabilities. They require all threads to maintain integrity. Break enough connections and the entire structure destabilizes. Marcus studied the network map, his analyst training identifying potential pressure points. These 3 elders, Sivath, Corvin, and Theller, they appear to be primary support nodes for Corvin's influence, but they're motivated by different interests. Sivath seems focused on traditional military values, Corvin on economic control, Theller on maintaining ceremonial authority. You see quickly, Shiv's skin shifted to colors that suggested impressed acknowledgement. Corvin maintains their support by addressing each one's priorities separately, but those priorities sometimes conflict, requiring careful balancing that creates evidence that threatens their individual interests differently might fracture the coalition. Marcus was already sketching investigation strategies. If I can demonstrate that Corvin's conspiracy against you actually undermines military effectiveness that Sivath values, or threatens economic stability that Corvin prioritizes, or violates ceremonial traditions that Theller protects, you create pressure from multiple directions that Corvin cannot easily counter without sacrificing support from at least one faction. Shiv leaned forward, her 4 arms moving in gestures that seemed to be thinking through tactics. But such demonstration requires specific evidence targeted to each elder's concerns, which means I need to investigate beyond just proving you're innocent. I need to show how framing you actively harms the interests that Corvin's key supporters care about. Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of a complex problem revealing its solution architecture. That's more work than simple timeline verification. That is comprehensive analysis of the type you demonstrated during negotiations. Finding solutions that serve multiple interests, creating frameworks that balance competing priorities. Shiv's skin had shifted to warmer shades, her posture less defensive than when the night began. This is why I claimed you, Marcus Reed. Not just because you are protected outsider, but because you think systematically about complex systems and how to navigate them. They worked through the night, Sheev providing detailed briefings on clan politics while Marcus mapped networks, identified pressure points, and constructed investigation strategies that would serve multiple purposes simultaneously. His datapad filled with notes about financial flows, communication patterns, political alliances, ceremonial obligations, all the interconnected systems that made Valorian power structures function. "The fabricated communications you showed me earlier," Marcus said, as the chamber's bioluminescence began shifting to colors that suggested approaching dawn. "They had to be created by someone with deep technical access to military systems. That's a limited pool of personnel. Approximately 17 individuals with necessary clearances and technical capability." Sheev pulled up personnel files. "Most are loyal to military command structure. 3 are known to be aligned with Corvin's faction. So if I can trace the technical fingerprints of the fabrications back to specific access patterns." Marcus was already thinking through digital forensics approaches. Even if the evidence itself looks authentic, the metadata of its creation might reveal who constructed it. Our internal security systems would show such patterns, but accessing them requires authorization I cannot obtain while under implicit suspicion. But civilian network routing logs might show unusual access patterns from military terminals during the times the fabrications were created. Marcus pulled up Valorian network architecture diagrams Sheev had provided. If someone with military clearance was accessing systems they don't normally use, civilian routing records would capture that without requiring military authorization to access. Sheev's skin flashed through colors that Marcus's translator identified as excited recognition. "And such civilian records are accessible through your diplomatic credentials for economic analysis purposes." "Exactly. I request access to analyze communication patterns relevant to trade logistics. Happen to notice unusual access patterns from military terminals. Pursue that as potential security concern." Marcus was warming to the investigation strategy. Completely legitimate diplomatic analysis that happens to reveal evidence of internal conspiracy. The chamber's bioluminescence had fully shifted to dawn colors, warm golden light replacing the night cycle's amber. Sheev stood, moving to the window where Valoria's sun was beginning to rise over the crystalline city. When she turned back to Marcus, her skin had settled into shades that suggested calm determination mixed with something that might have been gratitude. "The sanctuary claim ends at dawn," she said formally. "What was shared in this chamber is now carried by witness who has listened with honor. The tradition is fulfilled, and you are released from its requirements." Marcus stood as well, stretching muscles that had been sitting in alien furniture for too long. "The claim may end at dawn, but what we've started doesn't. You will investigate." Not quite hope in her voice, but definitely careful anticipation. "I'll perform thorough analysis of Valorian economic and communication systems as part of my assigned diplomatic mission," Marcus said, with the kind of careful phrasing that made both of them smile at the transparent fiction. "If such analysis happens to reveal evidence relevant to internal clan matters, well, that's simply the nature of comprehensive research." Sheev moved to the door, preparing to unseal it and allow Marcus to return to the diplomatic quarters. But before she activated the mechanism, she stopped and looked at him with an intensity that went beyond tactical appreciation. "You understand what you are undertaking. Corvin will recognize your investigation for what it is. He will attempt to interfere, to discredit your findings, possibly to threaten you despite diplomatic protections." Her skin shifted through concerned shades. "I claimed you as sacred witness to protect you from direct harm, but I cannot protect you from all consequences of involving yourself in our political conflicts." "I spent 7 years writing reports about trade structures that no one read," Marcus said. "This is the first time since I entered diplomatic service that the analysis I do might actually matter for something beyond optimizing resource allocation percentages. I'll take my chances with Corvin. Then I will provide you with initial access codes and contact information for sources who can guide your investigation without overtly revealing they are assisting. Sheev unsealed the door but paused before opening it. Marcus Reed, what began as sanctuary claim has become something more. An alliance, perhaps. A partnership in pursuing truth that serves both our people's interests. That sounds better than my previous assignment of optimizing crystalline export tariff structures. Her laughter was the same complex harmonic sound he'd heard before, translated imperfectly but clearly enough. Return to your quarters before the diplomatic delegation discovers your absence and creates additional complications. I will send the access codes through secure channels within the hour. Marcus stepped into the corridor, acutely aware that dawn light was filtering through the palace's crystalline architecture, and that he just spent an entire night locked in a Valorian warrior's chambers learning about political conspiracy. The diplomatic corps was going to have questions he wasn't entirely sure how to answer. But as he made his way back through corridors that were beginning to fill with palace staff starting their daily routines, as he passed Valorian guards whose skin shifted to surprised colors at seeing the human analyst emerging from restricted sections at dawn, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years of diplomatic service. The certainty that what he did next would actually matter. Sheev's words echoed in his mind. "You are mine tonight." It had meant witness, protection, trust shared under ancient law. But walking through an alien palace at dawn with investigation strategies already forming in his analyst's mind, Marcus realized it had also meant something more. A claiming that had bound them together in ways that transcended both species' typical diplomatic interactions. He had 7 years of analytical training, diplomatic credentials that provided access to information systems, and approximately 2 weeks before Corvin moved to eliminate the warrior who trusted him with her survival. Time to find out if an economic analyst could expose political conspiracy before it killed someone who'd chosen to trust him with her life. Marcus's quarters in the diplomatic wing felt absurdly mundane after spending the night in Sheev's chambers. Standard-issue furniture designed for human physiology, walls that stayed stationary rather than shifting through bioluminescent color changes, and absolutely no warrior commanders explaining political conspiracies. He'd managed to return just before the morning staff rotation, avoiding questions from Ambassador Patterson about his nocturnal whereabouts, and had approximately 30 minutes before scheduled breakfast with the diplomatic team. His datapad chimed with an incoming message through encrypted channels he hadn't even known existed in the Valorian communication network. The file attached contained access codes, network addresses, and a brief note in Valorian that his translator rendered as: "Begin with civilian routing logs. Cross-reference against military terminal access patterns during highlighted dates. Source contacts listed will provide context without requiring explanation of investigation purpose." Yes. Marcus smiled at the efficiency. Sheev had clearly spent the brief time since dawn setting up his investigation infrastructure, providing him with entry points that would allow legitimate research while concealing the actual purpose. He pulled up the access codes and began familiarizing himself with Valorian network architecture, mapping how civilian and military systems interfaced and where oversight gaps might exist. A knock at his door interrupted the preliminary research. Marcus hastily closed the sensitive files before calling out "Enter," expecting Patterson or one of the other diplomatic staff. Instead, a Valorian male entered, younger than most of the officials Marcus had encountered, his skin bearing lighter blue markings that suggested lower rank or civilian status. His posture was carefully neutral, neither aggressive nor submissive, and when he spoke it was in accented but clear Terran standard. "Analyst Reed, I am Velrin, Civilian Network Administrator for the Crimson Blade Clan's communication infrastructure. I believe you have questions about our systems relevant to your economic analysis work. Marcus processed the carefully phrased introduction, recognizing a source that Sheev must have activated. Yes, thank you for making time. I'm trying to understand communication patterns related to trade logistics, and I could use guidance on accessing the relevant civilian routing logs. Of course, such research is entirely appropriate for diplomatic economic analysis. Velrin's skin shifted to shades that might have been amusement. I have prepared documentation that will facilitate your access while ensuring you navigate our systems correctly. We would not want you to accidentally encounter restricted data that might complicate your legitimate research. The fiction was transparent, but maintained with professional courtesy. Velrin spent the next 20 minutes walking Marcus through Valorian network architecture, ostensibly teaching him how to access trade-related communication data, but actually showing him exactly where to look for the military terminal access patterns that would reveal who created Corvin's fabricated evidence. The highlighted date ranges in your request are particularly interesting from a network traffic perspective, Velrin observed, his tone carefully academic. Unusual access patterns from terminals that typically handle classified military communications, but during times when those terminals should have been idle according to standard operational schedules. Unusual how? Marcus asked, already taking notes that would serve dual purposes: legitimate network analysis and conspiracy investigation. Accessing civilian financial routing systems from military terminals designed for tactical communications. Creating data packets that mimicked standard civilian traffic patterns, but originated from military network addresses. Velrin pulled up network diagrams that showed the anomalous traffic flows. For someone conducting economic analysis, such patterns might suggest interesting questions about resource allocation and communication security protocols. Marcus studied the diagrams, his analyst training recognizing what Velrin was showing him: digital fingerprints of someone with military access deliberately creating traffic that appeared civilian in origin. Perfect cover for fabricating evidence that would blend into normal communication records, while actually being constructed from military systems, with the clearances needed to make the fabrications appear authentic. These access patterns, can they be traced to specific terminals or user credentials? The routing logs I can provide show terminal addresses. Correlating those to specific users would require cross-referencing with military access records, which are restricted. Velrin's skin shifted in ways Marcus was learning, indicated he was about to deliver important information carefully. However, a civilian network administrator performing routine security analysis might notice when military terminals access civilian systems during unusual time periods, and might include such observations in regular security reports that become part of public administrative records. Marcus understood. Velrin was offering to create legitimate public documentation of the suspicious access patterns, building a foundation that Marcus could reference in his own analysis without revealing he was deliberately investigating conspiracy. Such security reports would be helpful context for understanding communication efficiency in trade-related activities. I will ensure relevant security analyses are made available through standard administrative channels. Velrin stood, preparing to depart. If you have additional questions about network systems, my contact information is in the documentation I provided. I am always pleased to assist diplomatic personnel in understanding our communication infrastructure. After Velrin left, Marcus spent the remaining time before breakfast diving deeper into the network data. The suspicious access patterns were extensive. Someone with military clearances had spent months carefully constructing fake communication logs, financial records, and transaction histories that all pointed to Sheev collaborating with Razor Wind rebels. But they'd made mistakes, small errors in timing and routing that revealed the fabrications as fabrications once you knew what to look for. The challenge would be presenting this evidence in ways that convinced Valorian elders, without making it obvious that Marcus was deliberately investigating internal clan politics. He needed frameworks that positioned his findings as natural outcomes of his assigned economic analysis work. Breakfast with the diplomatic team was the usual combination of briefing review and social performance. Ambassador Patterson discussed the day's planned negotiations. Other staff members complained about Valorian ceremonial protocols, and everyone carefully avoided asking Marcus directly where he'd been the previous night, though the curiosity was obvious in their expressions. "Marcus, you'll be leading the economic impact assessment sessions this afternoon," Patterson said over what passed for coffee in Valorian diplomatic facilities. "The Crimson Blade clan wants detailed analysis of proposed trade structures. Should give you plenty of opportunity to examine their financial systems." Perfect cover for exactly the kind of investigation he needed to conduct. "I'll prepare comprehensive analysis of communication efficiency and resource allocation patterns. Might take several days to complete thorough assessment. Take whatever time you need. Building detailed understanding of their systems will serve the treaty negotiations well." Patterson's expression suggested she was pleased to have something concrete to show for their mission. "And Marcus, good work in the session so far. The Valorians seem to respect your analytical approach." If only she knew just how much respect his analytical approach had earned, and from whom. The afternoon sessions gave Marcus exactly the access he needed. Under the guise of analyzing trade communication efficiency, he dove deep into civilian network logs, cross-referencing the suspicious military terminal access patterns Velrin had highlighted. He maintained careful documentation of his research process, building a trail of legitimate economic analysis that happened to intersect with evidence of conspiracy. 3 hours into the work, his datapad chimed with another encrypted message. This one was brief. "Corvin has called emergency council session for tomorrow. Will present accusations against me citing need to investigate suspicious behavior evidenced by sanctuary claim invocation. Timeline accelerated, S." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Tomorrow. Corvin was moving even faster than Sheev had anticipated, using the sanctuary claim itself as justification for formal accusations that would trigger the legal process designed to prevent effective defense. He had less than 24 hours to gather enough evidence to disrupt a conspiracy that had been months in construction. The investigation intensity increased. Marcus worked through dinner, requesting additional access to financial routing systems under pretense of verifying trade transaction patterns. He contacted 2 more of Sheev's source network, a civilian financial auditor who happened to notice irregularities in accounts allegedly linked to Sheev's supposed treason, and a communication security specialist who had routine documentation, showing the military terminal access patterns during times that correlated with the fabricated evidence creation. Each source provided pieces of the puzzle while maintaining careful fiction that their assistance was simply normal cooperation with legitimate diplomatic research. Marcus wove it all together, building a comprehensive analysis that appeared to be about trade communication efficiency, but actually demonstrated systematic evidence fabrication. By midnight, or what passed for midnight on Valoria's longer rotation cycle, Marcus had assembled a preliminary case. The fabricated communications between Sheev and Razor Wind operatives had been created from military terminals during time periods when those terminals should have been idle. The financial transactions supposedly showing payment for classified information had routing patterns that were impossible given the claimed timelines. And most damningly, several of the key pieces of evidence had been created or modified after the events they purported to document. It was solid work, but presenting it would be the real challenge. Marcus couldn't simply burst into the council session and announce he'd discovered conspiracy. That would make his investigation obvious and give Corvin opportunity to dismiss it as alien interference in internal affairs. He needed a framework that positioned his findings as natural outcomes of his assigned work, presented through channels that Valorian elders would respect, and time to disrupt Corvin's accusations without appearing to be deliberate intervention. His datapad chimed again. This time it wasn't Sheev but Ambassador Patterson. "Marcus, the Valorians have requested you present preliminary economic findings to Clan Council tomorrow morning. Apparently your analysis impressed someone. This is unusual but good opportunity to demonstrate diplomatic value. Prepare overview of your work. Patterson." Marcus stared at the message, his mind racing through possibilities. Someone, and he strongly suspected Sheev working through intermediaries, had arranged for him to present to the council on the same morning Corvin planned to bring accusations. It was elegant manipulation, giving Marcus legitimate forum to present findings that would undermine the conspiracy while maintaining fiction that he was simply doing his assigned job. He spent the rest of the night refining his presentation, carefully structuring it to begin with actual trade analysis before transitioning to the communication efficiency findings that revealed evidence fabrication. The key was making the progression seem natural, each discovery leading logically to the next, until the council was confronted with proof of conspiracy before they realized they were seeing proof of conspiracy. Dawn arrived with Marcus having had maybe 2 hours of actual sleep, sustained by adrenaline and the kind of focused intensity that usually only hit him during final exam periods in university. He showered, dressed in his most formal diplomatic attire, and prepared materials that would either expose conspiracy or end his career in spectacular fashion. The council chamber was more intimate than the grand negotiating halls, designed for internal clan business rather than diplomatic pageantry. 23 clan elders sat in curved arrangement, their skin colors already shifting through patterns that suggested intense discussion had been happening before the human. "Yes, matriarch. With your permission, I will present findings from several days of comprehensive research into communication efficiency and resource allocation patterns." Marcus activated his presentation holographics, displaying what appeared to be standard economic analysis charts. "My research began with examining trade transaction flows and communication routing patterns to identify potential bottlenecks or inefficiencies in proposed treaty structures." He walked them through legitimate analysis for 10 minutes, actual findings about trade communication patterns, resource allocation optimization, efficiency recommendations. The elders listened with varying degrees of interest, their skin colors suggesting some approved of his thoroughness, while others were impatient for him to reach some conclusion. However, during this analysis, I encountered anomalies that seemed worth investigating further from a system efficiency perspective. Marcus shifted the holographic displays to show network routing patterns. Specifically, unusual access patterns from military communications terminals into civilian financial and communication systems, during time periods when those terminals should have been idle according to standard operational schedules. Several elders' skin colors shifted to more alert shades. Corvin's expression remained carefully neutral, but Marcus noticed his secondary hands had moved to a position that suggested tension. At first, I assumed this was simply unusual but legitimate inter-system communication. But when I cross-referenced the timing of these access patterns with actual military operational schedules provided by clan administrative sources, I found significant discrepancies. Marcus pulled up the timeline correlations, showing military terminal activity during periods when the terminals should have been unmanned. "This is beyond the scope of economic analysis," Corvin said, his voice carrying formal objection. "The human analyst oversteps his mandate by investigating military communication systems." I investigated civilian communication systems, Elder Corvin, which is entirely within my mandate for economic analysis. Marcus kept his tone respectful but firm. The military terminal access patterns appeared in civilian network logs that I was examining for trade efficiency purposes. I simply noted the anomalies and pursued them as any thorough analyst would. The matriarch raised one hand, silencing Corvin before he could object further. Continue, Analyst Reed. What did your pursuit of these anomalies reveal? That several data packets which appeared to originate from civilian communication sources actually were created on military terminals with specific security clearances, then routed through civilian networks to disguise their origin point. Marcus displayed the technical evidence Velrin had helped him compile. From an efficiency perspective, this represents significant waste of secure military resources for purposes that should be handled by standard civilian systems. He was walking a careful line, presenting the findings as system efficiency concerns rather than evidence of conspiracy, maintaining the fiction that he was simply doing thorough economic analysis. But the implications were obvious to anyone paying attention. These data packets, Elder Sivath spoke up, her skin showing colors Marcus associated with military focus. What was their content? I don't have access to classified content, Elder Sivath. My analysis only extends to routing patterns and efficiency metrics. Marcus pulled up more technical diagrams. However, I can confirm that these military-originated packets were formatted to appear as standard civilian communications, financial transactions, personal correspondence, routine data exchanges. The timing of their creation is interesting from a pattern perspective. He displayed the timeline showing when the suspicious packets were created, all correlating exactly to the dates of the evidence Corvin had fabricated to frame Sheev. Marcus never stated this correlation directly, just showed the timing pattern and let the elders draw their own conclusions. This is technical speculation presented as analysis, Corvin objected, his skin showing colors that suggested barely contained anger. Routing patterns prove nothing about content or intent. The analyst constructs implications from incomplete data. I construct only efficiency observations, Elder Corvin. Marcus kept his tone carefully neutral. That military terminals access civilian systems during times they should have been idle is simple fact confirmed by network logs. That the resulting data packets were designed to appear civilian in origin is technical observation. Any implications beyond efficiency concerns are for this council to determine, not for me to assert. The matriarch's skin shifted through contemplative colors. These irregularities you have documented, they can be verified through independent review. All my analysis is based on civilian network logs and administrative records that are publicly accessible within clan systems. Any network administrator with appropriate clearances can verify the patterns I've identified. Marcus displayed the source documentation. I've prepared comprehensive technical appendices showing my complete methodology, which meant any independent investigation would find exactly what Marcus had found. Proof that someone with military clearances had fabricated evidence using methods designed to hide their trail, but which left fingerprints in civilian systems they didn't completely control. Sheev had remained silent through the presentation, her posture formally neutral as required by her accused status. But Marcus caught the subtle color shifts in her skin that suggested carefully controlled satisfaction at watching her enemy's conspiracy unravel through channels he couldn't easily attack. This council will review the technical analysis Analyst Reed has presented, the matriarch declared. Elder Corvin, you called this emergency session to present accusations regarding Commander Sheev. Perhaps you should proceed with that matter. Corvin's skin flashed through colors that Marcus's translator identified as rage mixed with tactical recalculation. The conspiracy he'd spent months constructing was being exposed before he could even present the fabricated evidence, and doing so through channels that appeared to be routine diplomatic economic analysis rather than deliberate investigation. Matriarch, the accusations I intended to present were based on evidence whose legitimacy now appears questionable given the analyst's findings. Corvin's voice maintained formal control despite the obvious fury beneath. I request time to conduct independent verification before bringing formal charges that may be compromised by the system irregularities identified. It was masterful political recovery, acknowledging the problem Marcus had exposed, while positioning himself as someone who wanted to ensure accuracy rather than someone whose conspiracy had been revealed. But it also meant he couldn't proceed with accusations that were now publicly suspect. "Request granted," the matriarch said. "This council will conduct independent investigation of both the network irregularities and the evidence underlying proposed accusations. Commander Sheev will retain her rank and position pending outcome of verified findings." She turned to Marcus. "Analyst Reed, your thoroughness in economic analysis has served diplomatic relations well. The Crimson Blade clan appreciates your dedication to comprehensive research." Marcus bowed respectfully, maintaining the fiction that he'd simply been doing thorough economic work rather than deliberately investigating political conspiracy. "Thank you, Matriarch. I am pleased to contribute to mutual understanding between our peoples." The session concluded with formal ceremonies, elders dispersing to begin the independent investigations that would likely confirm everything Marcus had found and dismantle Corvin's conspiracy entirely. Ambassador Patterson was clearly thrilled that her analyst had impressed the clan leadership, completely oblivious to the political warfare that had just occurred. Marcus caught Sheev's eyes across the chamber, just a moment of contact, but enough to see her skin shift through colors that his experience now let him read as gratitude, respect, and something warmer that probably shouldn't exist between diplomatic analyst and alien military commander. He'd spent one night locked in her chambers as sacred witness under ancient law, had investigated conspiracy, gathered evidence, and presented it through channels that disrupted assassination plans while maintaining diplomatic fiction, had bound himself to her through choices that transcended both species' typical interactions. "You are mine tonight," she'd said, invoking ritual that meant witness, protection, trust. Walking out of the council chamber with Ambassador Patterson praising his analytical thoroughness, Marcus realized the claiming had been mutual. He was hers through sacred witness and political alliance. She was his through the choice to trust him with her survival and the partnership they'd forged in the hours between dusk and dawn. The sanctuary claim had ended at sunrise. But what they'd begun, the alliance, the trust, the connection that had formed through shared purpose, that continued in ways that neither Valorian tradition nor human diplomatic protocol had adequate frameworks to describe. 2 weeks later, after independent investigations had confirmed Marcus's findings and led to Corvin's removal from the council for evidence fabrication, Marcus received another encrypted message. This one was an invitation rather than intelligence briefing. The sanctuary claim may be invoked only once for any given matter, but there are other traditions, other ways of claiming and being claimed, if a human analyst wishes to understand them. My chambers tonight when you are ready to learn what comes after witness. S. Marcus looked at the message, thought about the warrior who'd trusted him with her life, the political alliance that had become something more complex than either had initially intended, and the fact that his assignment on Valoria had been extended another 6 months to continue the economic analysis work that everyone pretended was his primary purpose. He sent back a single word, "tonight," because some claims, once made, demanded exploration beyond the boundaries of ancient ritual and diplomatic fiction. And Marcus Reed, economic analyst turned conspiracy investigator turned something he didn't quite have words for yet, was ready to discover what came next.